Okay, so let's start. So today we're going to talk about monopoly. So the big picture for this is that in chapter 13, we talked about the cost of production. And so now we look at the revenue side because maximizing profit means total revenue minus total cost. But the revenue depends on market structure. We saw competitive markets on Friday. That's the chapter 14. Today we're going to talk about monopoly. So this is this chapter, chapter 15. Then we'll look at monopolistic competition and oligopoly. There could be other markets, but so you should look at more advanced courses for those. All right, so in this chapter we'll look at why do monopolies arise, and we'll look at why marginal revenue is smaller than prices for a monopolist. This is the key difference between a monopolist and a perfectly competitive firm. Then we'll see how monopolies choose price and quantity, and we'll see how that affects social well-being. Then we'll look at what governments should do and talk about price discrimination. Price discrimination is something that the monopoly can do. All right, so what is a monopoly? A monopoly is a firm that is the only seller of that particular product. So it's the complete opposite of perfect competition, where you have perfect substitutes. In the monopoly side, you have no substitutes. All right, so because of this, instead of being a price taker, a monopoly is a price maker. So because it does have the ability to affect prices. And usually this is caused by what we call barriers of entry. So again, this is the opposite of perfect competition, where there's free entry exit. But here we have what we call barriers of entry. Okay, so why would there be barriers of entry? Here we look at three potential barriers. The first one is monopoly resources. So a single firm controls a key resource. For example, so if I control the only water source in town, then of course I become a monopoly on water. It was up to a time when De Beers owns almost 90% of the diamond mines in the world. And of course, that means De Beers will be a monopoly on diamonds. Now it's actually no longer the case. So you may not hear that much about De Beers, but they have this slogan, 钻石恒久远，一颗永流传. That's their slogan for selling diamond rings. So if you have any firm that's controlling a key resource, then of course other firms cannot enter this market easily. Of course, this firm will not be selling this resource to competitors. The other possible reason of barriers of entry is governmental regulation. So the government gives a single firm the exclusive right to produce and sell this good. So for example, when you have a patent, then of course that means that during the length of the patent, the inventor or whoever he or she authorizes will be the only seller of this product. There's also copyright, so the publisher will have the only right to produce and sell this book. It used to be that in Taiwan, rice wine, tobacco, and other liquor, these are only sold by the sole company. Only one company can sell that. So of course, that company will be a legal monopoly because the government only allows this company to sell. And now it's reformed to be the TTL, or the Taiwan Tobacco and Liquor Company. So it's no longer the single seller of tobacco and liquor. So that is no more. But you can imagine there are other situations when you have this. For example, electricity in Taiwan is solely provided by Taipower. And so in that sense, Taipower is a monopoly, because if you need electricity, that's the only firm that you can go to buy electricity. Okay, and the third barrier of entry is actually not really about the market structure. It's about the production process. This is usually called natural monopoly. So this means that a single firm can produce a quantity for the entire market at a lower cost than breaking this into several firms. This happens when you have economies of scale. So for example, to provide, say, electricity, well, the network for providing electricity, well, there's a huge fixed cost to build the network. Similarly, say, to provide cell phone service, you have the same thing. To build a network for cell phone services, I mean, that involves a huge fixed cost. But the marginal cost for making or connecting another call is very low. So you have this economies of scale where having one company building this huge network and providing service to the entire market, it gives you a lower average total cost compared to having several firms each building their own network. So this is really not about the market structure of this particular industry or product. It's really about the production process. So it has this increasing return to scale, so because of this economies of scale. So yeah, for example, suppose you live in a country that has 1,000 households, and so you need to provide electricity. And what you get there is that you have a downward sloping average total cost curve. So the key thing here is that to build this network, to provide this electricity, there's a huge fixed cost involved, but the marginal cost for providing electricity is actually very small. Okay, so because of this downward sloping average total cost curve, what this means is that if you have one firm provide everybody, then the average total cost is only $50 compared to an average total cost of $80. And so what you get there is that it's cheaper it's more efficient for the society so that one firm is providing service for everybody. Okay, so here it's solely about the cost structure that's here. And so what this means is that it need not mean that you would result in one company. So natural monopoly is not really monopoly. It's really about the cost structure, about economies of scale. But it is, in some sense, a barrier of entry in the following sense. So that suppose I'm the only company, like say Chunghwa Telecom used to be the only company that's providing cell phone service. When other firms want to come in, well, they face this problem that it's very hard to compete with Chunghwa Telecom because Chunghwa Telecom is serving such a huge number of cell phone users and it has a huge network built there. So it has the lowest average total cost compared to a newcomer like say Taiwan Star or Far Eastern Telecom. I mean, these competitors, when they enter the market, it's very hard to compete with Chunghwa Telecom because Chunghwa Telecom has the lowest average total cost. And so in that sense, it is a barrier to entry. But this does not mean that a determined entrant would not be able to enter, because if there is a new entrant and it does indeed pay the huge fixed cost and provide a huge amount of users, then it would also have this economies of scale and have a very low average total cost. But it's just not easy. Okay, so let's compare monopoly versus perfect competition. A competitive firm is a price taker. It's small, it's one of many firms, and it faces individual demand curves. So it's perfectly inelastic, so you have a flat demand curve. So that's just the market price. You just take the market price as given, that's it. In contrast, for a monopoly, it's a price maker, so it does have market power, and it faces the entire market demand instead of individual demand. So you have a downward sloping demand curve. Because the whole market, you have a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, so you see here is that suppose you are a competitive firm, how can you sell more quantity? Well, you just take the price as given, so you can sell as much as you want at the market price. In contrast, if you're a monopolist, you're facing the downward sloping market demand. To sell more quantity, you need to lower price. So what this means is that if you're a competitive firm where you have a horizontal demand curve that you face as an individual firm, marginal revenue equals to price. But for a monopolist where you have a downward sloping demand curve that you're facing the entire market, that means that marginal revenue is no longer the price. Because when you want to sell more quantity, well, you have to lower the price, which means that there is a trade-off here. When you sell one more unit, you get the price of that unit, but you have to lower the price for all other existing units. Okay, so here's an example. Think about Hello Calf. This is the only board game place on campus. It should be on the third floor of Xiaofu, but unfortunately, during the pandemic, it's actually closed. Anyway, here we have a table to show the market demand for board game play. If the price is $60 per hour, then nobody wants to come. And then $55, there's one person, $50, two persons, and so on. So let's try to fill the missing space out of the table. You try to calculate the total revenue, average revenue, and marginal revenue, and ask what's the relationship between price and average revenue, and also what is the relationship between price and marginal revenue. All right, so let's try this. Okay, so here we have the quiz. Okay, so here you have the table over here. So what is the relationship between the price and average revenue? Okay, so time's up. So some of you say price equals to average revenue, some say greater, some say smaller, and the answer is price is equal to average revenue. But what is the relationship between price and marginal revenue? Okay, so I think most of you already made your choice. Let's try. So most of you said price is greater than marginal revenue. Some have other answers, but the majority is correct. So let's take a look. So if you multiply quantity and price, you get total revenue. So 0 times 60 is 0, 1 times 55 is 55, 2 times 50 is 100, and so on. So what is average revenue? Well, you divide total revenue by quantity. And of course, because price times quantity is total revenue, so dividing it by quantity, you get price. So price equals to average revenue. And so in this sense, it's the same as a competitive firm because you sell each unit at the exact same price. So price equals to average revenue. One note is that we'll talk about price discrimination at the end of this lecture. So in that case, something's different there. But in the standard case, well, the monopolist would sell the product at the same price to everybody. So price equals to average revenue. But if you look at marginal revenue, so going from 0 to 1, total revenue increases from 0 to 55, so marginal revenue is 55. Then going from 55 to 100, that's when quantity increases from 1 to 2, marginal revenue is only 45. And when you go from quantity 2 to quantity equal to 3, total revenue increases from 100 to 135. So marginal revenue is only 35, and so on. As you go down, you could see that marginal revenue could even be negative. Because even though I'm selling one more unit, I'm lowering the price for all existing units, and so there is a trade-off. And so the key thing here is that marginal revenue is smaller than price. This is very different from the competitive firm where price equals to marginal revenue as well. All right, so let's look at HelloCalf demand curve and marginal revenue curve. So here is the demand curve, and here is the marginal revenue table, so you can draw it so you get the marginal revenue curve. One thing I should note is that in this simple example, the demand curve is a straight line, and so the marginal revenue curve is also a straight line which has twice the slope. That's because it's a special case for a linear demand curve. In general, this may or may not be true. All right, so the reason you have this distinction is because increasing quantity, there's two effects on revenue. There's an output effect because you're raising revenue because you're selling more output. But there's also a price effect because you have to lower price in order to sell more quantity. And so you have this trade-off, and so the marginal revenue is smaller than price. And so it could even be negative, as I said. In our example, when HelloCalf is increasing quantity going up to 6 to 7, then actually total revenue drops from 180 to 175. So it could even go negative. All right, so what should the monopolist do to maximize profit? Well, rational people think at the margin, so rational firms also think at the margin. So you try to choose the quantity where marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. This is the same principle as the competitive firm. But then you can decide, so how can I set the price in order to set that quantity? And so you find this price on the demand curve because you're facing the entire downward sloping market demand. Okay, so here price is greater than marginal revenue. but marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. So what that means is that it depends. If the price is above average total cost, the monopolist is making a profit. And so let's take a look. So how does the monopolist choose quantity? It finds the MR and the MC and find where MR equals to MC. That's the quantity, that's the profit maximizing quantity that this monopolist would choose to produce and sell. And then it goes up the demand curve to find the price. And so here you find, profit maximizing quantity, that's where MR equal to MC, and then you go up to find at what price you can sell this quantity on the demand curve. So it's a two-step process. Find quantity using MR equal to MC, and then use the demand curve to figure out what price to set. And okay, so suppose this is the monopolist's average total cost curve. Then what you get is that, so at this monopolist quantity, the price minus ATC, that gives you the per unit profit. And if you multiply this with the monopoly quantity, this shaded area over here is the profit of this monopolist. And of course, this depends, right? I mean, your average total cost curve could be above the demand curve, so you could be making a loss. So that depends. Okay, so one thing to note here is that the monopoly does not have a supply curve. This is very important because a competitive firm is a price taker. It takes the market price as given and then decides what quantity to sell at that given price. So that gives the competitive firm a supply curve. So here is the price. I'm going to sell this amount. Here's the quantity supplied. So that relationship gives you a supply curve. But a monopoly is not a price taker. So it actually is a price maker. So its quantity is determined by MR equal to MC. It's not determined by price. And so the monopolist's choice of quantity and price is jointly determined by the marginal cost curve, marginal revenue curve, and also the demand curve. So trick question, what is the supply curve of the monopoly? No, the monopoly does not have a supply curve. So that's something that you should be aware of. Okay, so this is an example for the pharmaceutical market. Typically, a pharmaceutical market, the marginal cost for producing more drugs is very cheap. But the innovation cost is huge. So if you look at the example for, like, say, vaccination for COVID, you see this. I mean, multiple governments have invested a lot into the vaccines because the innovation, the R&D process is just burning money. It's very costly. But to produce these drugs or these vaccines, the marginal cost is very low. And so what this means is that when this new drug comes out, there's a patent. So it's a legal monopoly for the patent holder to be the only seller of this drug. And so this firm or the inventor would basically choose QM, where MR equal to MC. So that's where the two red lines intersect. And then goes up the demand curve to figure out what price, PM, to choose. Compared to that, when the patent expires, then you have generic drugs that would flood the market. And so what's going to happen is that the market will be priced at marginal cost, and so quantity would soar to QC. So here you see the difference between when the patent is in place versus when the generic drugs come in. Okay, so because of this difference, what you get is a welfare loss because of this monopoly. So remember from chapter 14, we know that the competitive market equilibrium maximizes total surplus because you're pricing at marginal cost. But in the monopoly equilibrium, the monopolist is pricing above marginal revenue. But to maximize profit, marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. So what this means is that you have this markup. But because of that, the marginal buyer has a value, which is P, that's greater than the marginal cost for the society to produce this additional unit. And because of that, the monopoly quantity, QM, is too low. It's lower than the socially efficient or the quantity that maximizes total surplus. You could actually produce more in order to increase total surplus. So in that sense, patents are bad because the monopolist equilibrium quantity is too small. But of course, at some sense, that is part of the design of the patent system, that once the patent expires, then everybody can produce this product. And then, of course, what that means is that because of these generic drugs entering, well, prices will go down and quantity will increase and to maximize total surplus. And so in contrast, when the patent is in place, the monopoly results in deadweight loss. Okay, so that's in that sense why we say monopolist is bad. So for a competitive market, what you see here is that you price at marginal cost. So quantity is QC, price is PC at marginal cost. So that's you're maximizing total surplus. But compared to that, if you have a monopoly, well, because you're choosing a quantity where MR equals to MC, so QM, this monopolist profit maximizing quantity, is lower than QC. And so because you're pricing at PM, it was a higher price than the marginal cost. So what this just means is that you have, again, this deadweight loss triangle coming out that too bad. I mean, this is gains from trade that is not realized, that could have been realized if we don't have this monopoly. Okay, so what I do want to stress here is that for economists, the monopoly earning a lot of money, this itself may not be a real problem. So you have higher producer surplus, smaller consumer surplus, but that's a transfer. As long as total surplus is maximized, you're fine. But the real problem comes from this inefficiency in the sense that monopoly is producing a quantity that's lower than the socially efficient quantity. And so there's gains from trade that is not realized. That is the real problem, or at least for economists, if you care about total surplus instead of equality. So the real problem for the monopoly is that there is gains from trade that is not realized. Okay, so that's for a monopoly. Now we'll move to price discrimination. What is price discrimination? This is you're selling the good at a different price to different buyers. That's price discrimination. So the key thing here is that the firm, if I can sell the same product to different buyers, then I should be able to charge people who have higher willingness to pay a higher price. And in that way, the firm could increase profit. Of course, what this means is that the firm would have to be able to separate different types of customers. If the firm cannot separate, then you cannot do price discrimination. And in fact, with price discrimination, you could actually increase efficiency. Let's take a look. So suppose you're the manager of the only movie theater in town. The price you charge is $180 per ticket. And given you sell 1,000 movie tickets, assume you only incur a fixed cost of $100,000 per week. How much profit is the movie theater making? Question one. Question two, if you're dropping the price to $50, you're able to sell 2,500 movie tickets. Calculate the profit. And then question three, suggest a way you can price discriminate when selling movie tickets. So suppose you calculate the profit if you price discriminate so that P1 equals to 180 and P2 equals to 150. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so first question. Suppose you own how much profit if you charge $180 per ticket and you're selling 1,000 movie tickets and your fixed cost is $100,000. That's your only cost because showing the movie, well, you have to buy the rights, you have to set up your theater, but that's it. So how much profit is the theater making? Less than 50,000, 50,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to 150, or more than 150. Most of you say it's between 50,000 and 100,000, and that is indeed the right answer. Okay, what if you drop the price to 50 NT dollars? Now you're selling 2,500 tickets per week, and so now calculate the new profit. Okay, let's look at your answers. Majority of you say less than 50,000 NT dollars, and that is indeed the correct answer. Okay, so now suppose you can price discriminate, so you can charge the first 1,000 high willingness to pay customers $180, and then charge the remaining people $50. So how much profit would you be making? Okay, so now the answers are pretty diverse, but you're actually making more than $150,000. Okay, so let's look at the answers. Okay, part A, you charge 180, quantity is 1,000. So total revenue is 180,000 minus your total cost of $100,000. So your profit is $80,000. What about if you price at $50? Now quantity becomes 2,500. So total revenue is $125,000, price times quantity. But then total cost is still $100,000. So you minus that. So profit is $25,000. Now here's the tricky part, price discrimination. I charge the first 1,000 people $180, but then I charge the remaining people only $50. Of course, this we're assuming that you are able to identify who are the high willingness to pay customers and who are the low willingness to pay customers. So what this means is that you sell the first 1,000 tickets at $180, so you get $180,000. Then you sell the remaining 1,500 tickets at the $50 low price point, and so you get $75,000. So your total revenue is the sum of these two, so that's $255,000 minus the $100,000 cost, so you're earning more than $150,000. You're actually earning $155,000. And of course, here, this hinges on the fact that the monopolist can try to distinguish between you are the high willingness to pay customer, you are the low type. Yeah. If I cannot identify who is the high type, the low type, then I cannot do this. Okay, so the extreme case, what we call perfect price discrimination. What this means is I can charge each customer a different price and exactly his or her willingness to pay. Somehow I'm like God, so I know your willingness to pay for this product, so I'm going to charge you just that. And the monopoly will get the entire surplus. So consumer surplus becomes zero because everybody is paying exactly their willingness to pay. So zero consumer surplus. But there's no deadweight loss because I can charge everybody on the demand curve. So for the single monopoly, you have this consumer surplus, huge monopoly profit, but you have deadweight loss. But suppose I can perfectly price discriminate. So now I'm charging everybody their willingness to pay. I'm going to charge all the way up to the place where marginal cost intersects with the demand curve because the monopoly will be making profit as long as the demand curve is above marginal cost. So the monopoly profit is the entire surplus, but there's no deadweight loss. So it's efficient. Of course, I mean, this will be the most unequal distribution of surplus because one single firm is earning everything. But in terms of efficiency, it's great. Okay, of course, perfect price discrimination is not possible because nobody knows everybody's buyer's willingness to pay. And if I ask you, of course you want to pretend you have a lower willingness to pay, right? Otherwise you're going to charge me. So what the firm can at best do is to try to separate customers into different groups based on observable traits like age or student status and so on. And so hopefully then you can do partial price discrimination. Going back to the movie story, well, you have discounts for students, for senior people, or like say weekday afternoons, because these people would have a lower willingness to pay compared to people who are willing to pay the full price on like say Friday evening. Similarly, for airline tickets, of course now for COVID, we don't have that much air travel, but so if somebody is gonna stay for Saturday night, it's likely that he's a vacation traveler compared to a business traveler who has a higher willingness to pay because the company is paying for the business trip, but he's not going to stay for the Saturday because he goes home for weekends. So if I observe that this round trip ticket is purchased by somebody who's staying for Saturday, the airline companies can give those vacation leisure travelers a discount. Similarly, in the US, you have these coupons in the newspaper. It's very hard to collect them, but you can get a discount. Again, this is also like price discrimination. If you're willing to spend your Sunday morning clipping these coupons, then it's more likely that you have lower income and lower willingness to pay. And so the firm can use this to do price discrimination and give these people a lower price. In some sense, even though we say that the US has a crazy college tuition, need-based financial aid is also a kind of price discrimination. So if you're rich or if your parents are rich, then they will charge you the full price of the tuition. But if your family income is low, then they'll give you need-based financial aid, and so you pay a lower price tag. And so in that sense, this is price discrimination. In contrast, NTU gives everybody free financial aid, so everybody pays very low, very few tuition. I don't know. I mean, I think it's fair if you have a wealthy family to pay more. But apparently in Taiwan, people don't think that way. So that's a special case in the US. And the other thing that you can see is what we call quantity discount. If you buy in bulk, in large quantities, then you get a better deal. And the key thing here is that if you're willing to buy more, these customers are different from those who are only to buy one. So here is Huana Weishou's popcorn price. Small is 89, medium is 106. That's twice as big as small. And large, which is 3 times as big, is only 115. So it's almost like they encourage you to buy the big. It's huge, and then so it's like whole family would share this. You can share this with your children or with your significant other or your friends or yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not a good idea during COVID, but so that's their pricing scheme. So that's using quantity discounts to do some kind of price discrimination. We stopped last week on public policy towards monopolies. So we looked at monopolies to see that a monopoly has a downward sloping demand curve. That's not like the competitive firm that has a horizontal demand curve. And because of that, MR is smaller than price. So when the monopoly tries to maximize profit, you get MR equals to MC to find the profit maximizing quantity, and then go up the demand curve to find what price to charge. So we saw that because MR is equal to MC, but price is greater than MR, so you're pricing above marginal cost. So there is deadweight loss due to the monopoly. Yeah, the monopoly is earning substantial profit. Then, so the question is, how can we deal with monopolies? The essence is to try to increase competition. The whole problem for monopoly is there is no substitute. There's no competition. In the US, since 1890, there are various antitrust laws trying to promote competition. There's the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, and because of this, you could even try to prevent mergers. So suppose the big firms in the same industry want to merge, of course, that would result in firms having larger market power or being closer to monopolies. So that's something that we should try to prevent. And of course, sometimes you even want to think about, should we break up these big companies? One of the leading cases on this is when Microsoft was producing both Windows, the operating system, and Office, the Office suite, which so many people are using. And so there's talks that whether we should break up Microsoft into 2 separate companies. Yeah, so AT&T was a huge telecom giant, and it was actually broken into 7 small companies before a lot of them re-merged together again. So to stop these mergers and acquisitions, that's one way to counter this issue of monopoly. But also what you could do, even without changing the company structure itself, well, one thing that's important is you should try to prevent companies from colluding with each other. So if companies can coordinate and set the same price, of course, that means that even if you have a lot of companies, there is no competition because everybody is colluding at this fixed price. This is what we call price fixing, and it's illegal. Actually, it's a criminal charge in the US. So actually, if you read the news, in Taiwan, several LCD panel companies were engaged in price fixing, and they were actually not only fined by the US Justice Department, but also some of their CEOs had to go to jail because of these violations. So trying to prevent price fixing or other kinds of coordination across competitors that would lower competition, that's also something that's important. Okay, so regarding mergers, so there's this survey question, do you agree or disagree with this statement, or do economists agree or disagree with this statement? So a merger of AT&T and Time Warner would likely increase consumer surplus over the ensuing decade. So this was asked in the expert panel survey. So first thing, do you agree or disagree with this statement? So you can strongly agree, uncertain, disagree, strongly disagree, or no opinion, or prefer not to answer. We have to move on, so let's look at the existing. A lot of people are not sure. Some agree, some disagree. Okay, so the prediction question. So do you think economists would agree or disagree with this statement? A merger of AT&T and Time Warner would likely increase consumer surplus over the ensuing decade. Okay, so the majority of you say less than 49%, some say above 50%, and the answer is indeed less than 49%. So here's the 55% of the economists are not sure, just like you guys, and then 36% disagree, only 9% agree. So the key thing here is that AT&T and Time Warner, these two big giants, well, if they merge, it's likely they would have enormous market power, and of course, that's the main concern. All right, so the other possibility, so instead of reducing or promoting competition through antitrust laws, the other possibility is to regulate these monopolies. For example, you should try to regulate monopolies' price. So for example, in Taiwan, electricity price and water price, these are regulated by the government. So even though Taipower is a monopolist, it's the only seller on the electricity market, but the government basically sets the electricity price. And so Taipower would not be able to try to maximize its profit, and instead, so it has to sell at this regulated price. So of course, similar practice is common when dealing with natural monopoly. So the key thing or the challenge is, well, if you price at marginal cost, because of the natural monopoly, so marginal cost is always lower than average total cost. So this natural monopoly is going to be losing money. So how should you correctly price, like say electricity, so that Taipower is still breaking even? That's a big problem. So usually what you try to do is you try to price at exactly the average total cost so that these companies can break even, so that they have zero economic profit, but at least they can continue to provide this service. Of course, this is tricky, right? I mean, if you think of Taipower, Taipower is a company owned by the government. There could be some bureaucracy there. So there could be some inefficiency that's not related to the production itself, but because it's a governmentally owned company. So Taipower says, hey, this price, if you price at this price at marginal cost, it's too low, we can't survive. But it's not clear if it's because they're not doing their job, or is it truly that, so we're pricing below the ATC curve. So here, the main problem is that there's no incentives for these natural monopoly to try to reduce their costs, because you're going to subsidize me and price at my costs anyway, so why should I improve? Okay, the other way to do this is to just have the government own the company, so that's public ownership. In the US Postal Service is owned by the government. In Taiwan, it used to be that Taiwan CPC, or the Taiwan China Petroleum Company that sells gasoline, that is a company that's owned by the government. TTL, so that's Taiwan Tobacco and Liquor Company, so that used to be the only seller of cigarettes and wine, but of course now the market is opened. So again, this is another governmental ownership. But the challenge here is that for private owners, they have incentives to minimize costs. But if the government does a bad job, who takes the responsibility? I mean, it's the taxpayers that are losing money, and it's the customers that are not getting the best products and services, but the people who run the company are governmental employees and they don't care. So there you have this inefficiency problem here because they don't have the incentives to minimize cost. Okay, so here we try to do some promote competition through antitrust laws. May or may not work. Well, I already gave you examples where the antitrust authorities, they broke up AT&T, but eventually they allowed them to merge back again. There were talks about breaking up Microsoft, but that never realized. So that may not be, there's no like cure-all silver bullet. And trying to regulate it, well, you might have this problem not pricing it correctly or not giving the firms the right incentives to minimize costs. And if you have the government own it, then you have this bureaucracy coming in. So actually, some economists say, hey, maybe doing nothing is better than trying to mess things up and make things even worse. So maybe just leave it as it is. So that's another suggestion. Well, of course, here it's not really that easy to make the right choice because here, to figure out what the government should do is not only an economics problem, but it's also a political problem that you have to solve. The last suggestion, this is from my UCLA professor, Harold Demsetz, is we should try to auction off the market. So the leading example here is if you think of say cell phone services. Taiwan has been auctioning off since the 2G license, 3G license, 4G license, and now the 5G license. If you read the news, you will see all these reports where every time the government says the 5G license is up for auction, then these big telecom companies, Chunghwa Telecom, Far Eastern Telecom, Taiwan Mobile, Taiwan Star, and so on, these companies start to bid for these cell phone licenses, and they pay billions of dollars. Every time people talk about, oh no, the consumers are going to be worse off because since they paid such a huge price, well, it's likely that they're going to charge a high price for cell phone service. But every time you see that never happens. So when the 4G license came, there were talks about these companies going to be charging very high prices. But then there was this $4.99 all-you-can-eat, unlimited 4G service. Now there's the 5G. I think it's not down to $49.99 yet, but there was these fears of thousands of dollars in cell phone fees. Well, that never happened. So maybe auctioning off the market is a good idea, especially if you have a natural monopoly. Well, because the key thing here is that when you auction off the market, well, the government can receive huge amounts of revenues that it can be used to either subsidize the consumers or put to other use. And so the inequality problem that the monopoly profit is creating goes away. But then by deciding how many licenses you want to auction, you can have the right number of operators, like say to provide the cell phone service or these other public utilities that have this natural monopoly issue. Then you won't have this problem of having too many providers trying to construct the same network and having a higher cost. So you can use the revenue to subsidize the customers if that's needed. And so you can solve this deadweight loss problem. Remember, the problem for the monopoly is that because you're pricing above marginal cost, there is deadweight loss. But if you can correctly subsidize this, then okay. So what's the takeaway? The reality is that in the real world, you don't really see that many examples of a pure monopoly that has no substitute at all. Even for this class, well, if you don't want to take this principles of economics class, there are other classes, other principles classes that you can take. Of course, these are not perfect substitutes, but to say that I'm a monopoly, there's no other class that you can take, that's an exaggeration. But many firms do indeed have market power because they sell a unique flavor of a product. So for example, Apple does have market power because the iPhone is just different from other cell phones. The MacBook Air is just different from all the other laptops. So having a unique variety, this gives this company's market power. And the other example is that a lot of firms actually have a large market share. So even though they're not literally a monopoly, but they still have market power. Chunghwa Telecom is not the only seller of cell phone services, but it has such a huge market share that it does have market power. And so every time Chunghwa Telecom sets the prices, the other companies, all of them are affected by it. So if you have a large market share and you don't have that many viable competitors, then this firm does have market power. And so in many of these cases, well, you can find a lot of them, the results of this chapter apply. For example, you'll be pricing above marginal cost, so you have deadweight loss. These things would still apply. Okay, so here's the comparison between competition and monopoly. The first three are similarities, so both firms want to maximize profit. MR equals to MC, that's the golden rule to maximize profit. How do you choose quantity? You find the right quantity so that MR equals to MC. And in the short run, both the competitive firm and the monopolist can earn economic profits in the short run. But now the other rows are the differences. For the competition, there are many firms. Monopoly has only one firm. Marginal revenue equals to price under perfect competition, but marginal revenue is smaller than price. The MR curve is below your demand curve when you have a monopoly. And so for the competitive firm, you are pricing at marginal cost, but the monopoly is charging a markup, so price is above marginal cost. So because of this, the welfare maximizing quantity is produced under perfect competition, but not under monopoly. You're producing less than the welfare maximizing quantity. In the long run, there's free entry under competition, but the monopolist, because nobody can enter. That's the key thing. But the last thing is that you can do price discrimination. That's something that we talked about last week as well, if you are a monopoly. But if you are a competitive firm, you're a price taker, then you cannot do price discrimination. All right, so next survey question. If a regulator had not approved mergers in the past decade between major network airlines, travelers will be better off today. So it used to be that there are more than a handful of airlines in the US, but during the past decade, there was this trend of mergers. So I think Northwest merged with, I think it's Delta, and then Continental merged with United. So the question is, well, these mergers were allowed by the antitrust agencies. The question is, if they did not allow these mergers, then travelers will be better off. So the question is, do you agree or disagree? And do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? Okay, so do you agree or disagree? If regulators had not approved mergers in the past decade between major networked airlines, travelers would be better off today. Strongly agree, agree, uncertain, disagree, strongly disagree, no opinion, or prefer not to answer. A lot of you say agree, so that's your personal statement. Now the question is, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? Okay, so let's look at your results. So a lot of you say 1 to 49%. Some of you say 50 to 99%. And the answer is indeed 49% and less. So actually 45% of the economists are not sure. They don't know. But 29 agree, 26 disagree. It's divided, yeah. Okay, so the last example. A consumer advocate is discussing the airline industry on the news. He says, there are so many rates offered by airlines that it is technically impossible for a 747 to be carrying a full load of passengers where no two of them paid the same price for their tickets. This is clearly unfair and inefficient. He continues, in addition, the profits of the airlines have doubled in the last few years since they began this practice. And these additional profits are clearly a social burden. All right, so we need legislation that requires airlines to charge all passengers on an airplane the exact same price for their travel. So question, list some of the ways airlines divide their customers according to their willingness to pay. Second, is it necessarily inefficient for airlines to charge different prices to different customers? Why or why not? The last one, is the increase in profits generated by this type of price discrimination a social cost? All right, so let's look. List some of the ways airlines divide their customers according to their willingness to pay. Oh, by age, good. What else do we have? VIP, yeah. Economy class, yeah, good. Business class. Yeah, different classes of seats. Yeah, so that's something that, yeah, you have business class, you have first class. Now you actually have premium economy, and then they have all these different fancy names. That, I think, is one of the leading ways that the airline tries to do price discrimination. If you're willing to pay a premium, well, you get better service or better food, or you get more attention from the flight attendant, or you have this seat that you can lay flat and you have a good night's sleep, and so on. Yeah, so that's one thing. But there's some other very interesting things, like here you have number of luggages. So if I only have carry-on, then I get a lower price tag. If you want to check in extra luggage, of course, then you're charged more. Let's see what else. By age, yeah, you could have some senior discounts going on. Or actually for young children, they would have a lower price tag. If you have a baby, then you're on your lap. That's heavily discounted. Oh, look at this, booking website. Yeah, so if you book this from the airline company, it's more expensive. But if you find this priceline.com, you can bid for a lower price, or some other special website, discount flights that you can find there. And what else? Oh, whether or not this round trip ticket involves a weekend. Because if you're a business traveler, it's likely that you would only stay for a couple of days and you would not stay for the whole weekend. So you would fly to, say, San Francisco today and, say, come back on Thursday or something like that. Of course, now it's less likely because now you have quarantine issues that you have to face. But compared to that, if this is a family trip or a leisure travel, you're on vacation, then likely it's going to involve flying there on Friday and then staying for Saturday, coming back Sunday or Monday or something like that. Okay, so next one. Is it necessarily inefficient for airlines to charge different prices to different customers? Why or why not? So there's yes, no, or don't know. Very quickly, the majority says no, and then, yeah. So the real issue is, why is it not necessarily inefficient? Well, we've learned price discrimination. So if you forgot that, please review the whole idea of price discrimination. The extreme form of this is perfect price discrimination, where there's actually no deadweight loss. Of course, it's not really equal. So is the increase in profits generated by this type of discrimination a social cost? Okay, yeah, so because of time, we need to move on. But I think the key thing here is that if people are willing to accept this price, then maybe that's fine. But of course, it is true that inequality is an issue. So that is something that people are concerned about. Okay, so because of time, we have to move on. To summarize, monopoly is the only seller of the market. And so you have this because you have one firm that controls key resources, or the government is giving this exclusive right to a firm, or you have one firm that can supply the whole market at the lowest cost. And because of this market power, the monopolist is facing MR that's lower than the price. MR curve is lower than the demand curve, that is downward sloping. And you choose quantity, so MR equals to MC, and then find the right price to charge according to the demand curve. So you're charging above marginal cost, so there's deadweight loss. And we talked about price discrimination. And the extreme form is perfect price discrimination, where there's no deadweight loss, but it's really inequality is the issue. Then we talked about today 5 different ways that the regulators or policymakers can deal with monopolies. Do nothing is even an option here because there's no silver bullet. But I think auctioning off the market is the way to go. All right, so this is my one-page summary. MR to MC, this is still true, but price is greater than marginal cost because you have a downward sloping demand curve. That's the key difference between this chapter and chapter 14. And so there's a welfare cost of the monopoly. The real problem economists care the most is efficiency loss. There's deadweight loss. But of course, so there is inequality issues as well. And so what I would say is, yeah, auctioning off the market is the right thing. We have been seeing very good examples in Taiwan's 4G and 5G auctions. So I think we should try to do this on other monopolies as well. So here's the homework. These are the homework questions from the textbook. And then here are the past final exam questions regarding this chapter. Oh, and we have true or false. Monopolists can achieve any level of profit they desire because they have unlimited market power. How many of you think it's true? How many of you think it's false? How many of you are not sure? Okay, it's okay to be not sure. But the whole point for this question is state, I think this is true or I think this is false, and here are my reasoning. Next one, true or false? Heavy competition among firms for a limited number of customers leads to such devices as discounts for students and senior citizens. So the student discounts, senior citizens discounts come from fierce competition among firms. How many of you think this is true? How many of you think this is false? Okay, how many are not sure? So again, the idea here is to think clearly and state, I think this is true, or I think this is false, and here are the reasoning. All right, so this is the end of chapter 15.